Thank you everybody for joining us. You are with Chinstrap Community. Chinstrap Community is a resource center for people who are interested in commercial open source software, whether you're a founder, whether you're a developer, whether you're a entrepreneur or prospective entrepreneur, or whether you are in the university academic ecosystem, or you're an investor. We provide sort of guidance, content, training, education, with the aim of educating people about commercial open source software. This is a fireside chat hosted by myself, Saber Ibrahim, and Heather Meeker, with Paul Copplestone, who's CEO and co-founder of Supabase. Supabase is one of the most popular and widely used development platforms for Postgres. It's basically now, a household name in the developer community. It began as an alternative to Firebase, but it has in many ways eclipsed Firebase and outgrown that description. And Paul will talk about why that is. It's also one of the hottest commercial open source software projects. It's amassed almost 90,000 GitHub stars and 1,500 contributors. In April of this year, Supabase raised $200 million at a $2 billion valuation, and a significant milestone. In a few days here in the Bay Area, Supabase will be hosting its first ever user conference in San Francisco on October 3rd. And that's a pretty big deal. And I know that's something that Paul's very, very excited about. So with that, we'll dive right in. Paul, if you could talk about sort of the genesis of Supabase and the idea for Supabase, and what exactly was kind of the aha moment for you that sparked that.
The main genesis goes back quite a long time. I knew I wanted to build a database company, and largely that's because I've worked with databases throughout my career, and I know that they're not easy for developers to use. They're quite difficult. So for a long time, I've been planning how to build this database startup, and around 2019, it became clear to me that it was about the right time. This is my third startup now, and I reached out to my co-founder now and said that this is the type of company that I want to build, and would you like to build it with me? I think the main thing that maybe if I can point at an aha moment was we knew that we wanted to build an open source company, and we were pretty keen on building around Postgres. It wasn't the most popular database at the time, but we could see that it was gaining a lot of popularity. And I had used Firebase in the past, and I had hit some scaling problems with it. It's a really phenomenal tool platform, but I had to migrate to Postgres for one particular part, and that was the real-time feature that Firebase has, which is very nice. Postgres does not have this real-time feature, so I had developed a server on top that could mimic that behavior within the Postgres ecosystem. So when I went out to market, I originally put sort of as our tagline, real-time Postgres, and it wasn't getting a lot of traction. And then one day we changed the tagline to, as you pointed out, open source Firebase alternative. And literally from that day onwards, it was quite clear that we were onto the right thing. We went to the top of Hacker News. Nothing changed but the tagline, but we got a lot of feedback, a lot of people coming in and just talking about how they were excited about what we were building.
So you said you wanted to start an open source database company. What made you decide to go down the open source route?
I think largely it's just philosophical for us, at least. I know for a lot of people, maybe there might be some technical advantages, which there are, and I'm happy to talk about them. But for Ant and myself, we actually never really had a conversation around it. We knew that we wanted to work within the open source ecosystem is the type of way that we operate and the things that we're benefited from. And because we didn't want to build a new database, we thought that was a bit of a waste of time. One of our philosophies is to try to support existing open source tools as much as we can. So tools like Postgres, and there's another one called PostgREST, which is a RESTful API on top of Postgres. These things exist and they're very good, but they maybe could use more support from commercial entities like ourselves. And so we didn't think it was right to kind of push just some open source tools while we ourselves were not an open source company. So it from the very start, it was just the way that we wanted to build.
Oh, that's great. So, Supabase is under the Apache license, which is a permissive license. Um, can you tell us about why you chose that and maybe the process that you went through in making the choice, any hurdles that you faced in making the choice, and um, why you thought the choice was important?
We actually use three types of licenses within all of our ecosystem. So it's either Postgres, MIT, or Apache 2. All of them are OSI compliant, as you know very well. So Postgres is very liberal, and we try to use the Postgres license for anything within the Postgres ecosystem, especially extensions or anything that we hope to merge back up into Postgres itself. MIT largely will use this for client libraries, things that we want to be very liberal. And then Apache 2 we might use for servers or in particular things that might have a patent around them. So a really good example was a company that we acquired along the way. We just relicensed it. We acquired a patent at the same time. And so we wanted to make that patent freely available for anyone who was using the tool. And so Apache 2 gives that quite liberally. So we use that license where that's a necessity.
Uh, did you uh, did you face any kind of, I don't know, opposition or questions in choosing the license, or was it an easy sell to stakeholders, investors, and so forth?
I think the temptation is always to do something that's a bit more like an AGPL or something like that, um, which I can really understand, especially if you're a commercial entity, you want to maybe have some sort of protection. For us, we never felt like our commercial entity was at risk if we give everything liberally. We compete on developer experience, and if someone's doing a better job hosting the tools that we develop than we are, then they probably deserve to win the customer over, and it forces us to compete not on the license itself, but on yeah, that usability. I think the main thing that AGPL becomes a bit tricky, not because of the license itself, but when you start having conversations with some enterprise customers, they become a bit more nervous around the license, not because it might um, uh, not because I believe that it actually does force them to, say, open source their code, but because they don't even want to take the risk. So when you start getting into these enterprise agreements, it's much simpler if you just say, "Hey, everything that we have is MIT or Apache or Postgres, which are all very universally approved by all customers."
Yeah, the phrase I use when dealing with that problem is they don't want to undergo the brain damage of dealing with a Pharaoh TPL, even though it might work perfectly fine.
Exactly. Yeah. It's fine, but you just avoid the conversation if you can.
So to bit of a follow-up on that, follow-up question on that, to those who are listening, who are, dealing with the challenge of choosing a license. And, as you mentioned, Supabase has gone the very permissive route, rather than going the AGPL route. What would you say to entrepreneurs who are very nervous about going the permissive route, and say they're comfortable with open source, but they're tempted to go sort of the more restrictive route and adopt AGPL, or even, a non-OSI approved license that, gives them more control. What would you say to sort of the things that might be making them nervous about going the permissive route as you have chosen?
Well, I imagine the reason why they're nervous is that they believe that at some point they will be so successful that something like an AWS will come along and steal everything that they've done. I think for resolving that fear, they have much bigger problems to solve than an AWS coming along and stealing all of their IP. Just literally the process of building a successful startup is much, much harder than people anticipate. So you should focus on, first of all, becoming successful, I guess. And the license is really one of the smallest things that you need to worry about. Now, there are some nuances, of course. Like it's very hard to put this in black and white. In some cases, it really makes sense that maybe your license is a bit more restrictive, and maybe you're not dealing, say, with the type of customer that we do, where we've got a lot of developers. Our community, I think we've got 4.5 million developers now on our platform. So there's a huge chunk of them that are self-hosting, and I'm quite happy for them to do that liberally. And, they're making a choice that they don't want to spend, say, $20 a month, $25 a month. I would prefer that they use it for free. But there could be, for example, startups that each one of their customers might be worth $100,000, $1 million just to start off with. And in this case, maybe you do want to think carefully about your license. So it's too hard to give any one size fits all answer to this, but just know that usually the license is kind of the smallest issue that you have to solve when you're getting started.
No, that's a really great point, and I think the take home there, I guess for me, is that you know companies that are losing a lot of sleep over the license issue. This may not be of much comfort, but it's kind of a reality. There are bigger issues to lose sleep over if you're building a startup than the license question.
Yeah,
Uh,
Bill.
that's a great.
I think it's similar to open source. I know a lot of people are nervous about, say, open sourcing their code. And when they do it, no one notices. That's kind of the truth. You put it out in the world, and good luck if anyone stumbles across your open source repository. So I think you just need to learn that you got to build in public, and probably it's a lot harder than you think. If yeah, just focus on building the startup, and the open source will sort itself out.
For sure. So returning to the question of community, Supabase has done a great job growing its community, and that's something that you touched upon. What would you tell new cost founders about that? Like, what are some of the kind of creative strategies that you employ to grow your community and your contributor base, particularly in the early days of Supabase?
Yeah, in the early days, and even now, actually, we try to treat the community kind of as an extension of the company. Um, in some ways, you might have concentric circles of community. So you might have your employees and your contractors, and then you've got the real advocates within your community, and then you've got the people who contribute, and then you've got the drive-by collaborators who might be just adding a GitHub issue or thumbs upping anything on GitHub. So try to engage people as much as you can. And where you see people coming into one of these kind of orbits, I guess, then pull them in closer. And if they drift away, don't worry too much. That's the ebb and flow of any community. For us, what we ended up doing was, people can contribute in many ways. One of the ways they might do it is literally just community support. So we had a Discord that we set up, and this one is completely managed by the community. We kind of put our stamp on a couple of people as the key maintainers, but there and there, there's a couple of people in our community who are very famous, and they just look after our community. Likewise, on our Reddit, maybe we've got a few of our team inside, but a lot of it's handled by our community. And so we have this kind of mechanism. And then if people become really they're starting to work a lot and show that they're putting in a lot of time, we actually sponsor them. We pay them through Open Collective or GitHub sponsors, and we treat them again like a bit of an extension of our community. That one's a very tricky one because in many ways, you might just want to start off by sponsoring them a small amount because it's sponsorship. And in some ways, this can take away the joy of contributing, or maybe they'll compare the work that they're doing to what they could earn in their day-to-day job. And so you got to be a little bit careful with the sponsorship and the way you position it for them. But for some of our community, they wanted that and they liked it. So yeah, we approach community in many different ways. And yeah, it's been a bit of a long process, one that we haven't nailed, but I think we've done a decent job up until now.
Great. So there's one thing that kind of I guess based on what you mentioned earlier, there's maybe a distinction, or if you could talk about sort of the distinction between, promoting Supabase, the community, and encouraging people to join the community, irrespective of whether they become paying users or not, versus promoting Supabase as, a commercial service and as a SaaS product. Can you talk about sort of the distinction between those two things, and what are sort of the unique strategies that go into each endeavor?
Yeah, there's always a tension between a commercial service and the open source service. It took me a long time to realize, um, it's quite obvious that there's a tension. It took me a long time to tease out the key tensions that exist. So, what you have when you are a commercial entity are three things that people assess you by your kind of open sourciness. The first one, which we touched on at the start, is your license. So, for example, Supabase checks all those boxes. Is our license completely OSI compliant? Are you using something that anyone can self-host freely, free as in beer? Then that's one of the vectors that they'll assess you. The other two, first of all, is self-hosting. How completely and how easily can you self-host? Now, if you can only self-host, say, half of it, and maybe half of it's under is closed or under an enterprise agreement, then people will see you not quite as open source as you could be. So compare, say, I don't know a good example, but one that is a good example of doing the right job is Postgres itself. You can self-host the whole tool. There's nothing hidden away. It's completely self-hostable. The third one, which is a bit tricky, because for anyone who's listening to this, I'm going to assume you're a commercial entity. If there is any commercial entity attached to an open source tool, then actually your tool will be assessed as not quite as open source as something that's only got a free community. And it took me a long time to realize this one. And so in many ways there's a tension where you're earning money, people expect you to give freely, and it should always be free. And even if you do that, the fact that you're making money might be seen as impure by the open source purists. This is just something that you have to accept, and you can't please everyone. It ends up flipping. Actually, it's a strange dynamic, because eventually what happens is if your tool becomes successful enough, let's take Postgres again, it's completely open source. It's not owned by any commercial entity. And in fact, it's many different commercial entities collaborate on it. And in this way, this is the pinnacle of open source, because it means that forever, for the foreseeable future, it'll continue to have maintenance, and that benefit will not accrue just to one single organization. It'll accrue to many different communities. So this is kind of the absolute pinnacle of open source, in my opinion. So yeah, it's a very nuanced topic. It took me a long time to tease out, but just know that, yeah, if you're going into open source and you're a commercial entity, you'll always get some sort of tension from your community, and you just have to accept it.
No, I think that's an excellent point. What I would kind of take home from that, I guess, for me personally, is that I think if you can pull it off, the end game is that you've built an ecosystem. Uh, that ecosystem benefits everybody. It benefits, the commercial entity, Supabase, and it benefits the community, irrespective of whether the members of the community become paying customers or not. And ultimately, that feeds upon itself in a way that everybody wins. There are only winners. There are no losers. Um, it- how did you go about sticking with the theme of the commercial aspects? How did you go about developing your revenue model and deciding upon pricing?
Yeah, this one's an interesting one because I get approached by a lot of open source founders who ask how to price something. And for us, it was quite clear. We host databases, and this is something that you pay for because you always want it on. So it's an infrastructure play. For us, it's quite clear. Well, it becomes clearer when you compare it or contrast it to something that's, say, a client library, which is hosted somewhere else. You might say npm install some JavaScript library or Python library, which is hosted on someone else's infrastructure. And a lot of the time, I see um, open source founders coming to me and asking, how can I monetize something like a client library? The truth is, it's a lot harder to do any monetization around something like that. When it's hosted by someone else, then it's very hard to charge people for something that you're not, there's no underlying resources except for the development time itself. So basically, you don't want to charge for the development time, you want to charge for the running time. So if you're focusing on building a commercial entity, you probably want to be sitting in that infrastructure layer or figuring out how to be charging for the running time of what you're building.
So let's talk a little bit about building the business from a financial point of view. You've closed a few funding rounds. Um, was being a commercial open source software company, uh, did you have any challenges in educating your investors about why the company was a good prospect? Um, and how did that come up in the process of raising your funding rounds?
Yeah, when we started, I guess the kind of open source alternative strategy wasn't so developed. I think it's developed over the years, and now it's becoming increasingly popular for venture capital to look at open source companies as the right strategy. And the reason why it's quite beneficial is because in the open source ecosystem, the VCs can quite clearly see your community traction. It's quite apparent, it's quite open, and so they can form a thesis without actually ever talking to you. And if you contrast that to a company that is not open source, then they just have less information about that company to see how it's tracking. So, in many ways, I see it as a benefit. Outside of the VC world, I think it's just from a business point of view, the right way to think about it is if you take two tools that are at parity with each other and you say to a developer, here's these two tools, one is open source and one is not, the developer is always going to choose the open source one. They just usually are philosophically aligned. So I think in that way, it's regardless of whether you're going to get VCU funding or not, you want to give yourself every advantage possible when you're building your startup. And that one is a very clear advantage. So um, it's a good business strategy, even if you're not sure how to price it. You still want, I think, to be building in the open source.
That's actually a great segue into our next question, and that's what are some of the benefits, and just elaborating upon what you just mentioned, what are some of the benefits you've noticed about, having built an OSS community around Supabase that, you're sure that you would not have achieved otherwise if you had kept it closed source?
Yeah. So I think the community is probably driving a lot of our growth. well, definitely driving a lot of our growth. We've got a lot of advocates. We have people who are on social media promoting us, not because we've asked them. We don't pay anyone to promote us. They just do it because they believe in our philosophy. They know how we build. They like what we're building. And we have a lot of people that use it for free. They self-host it, and they still advocate for us as well, and that benefits even our commercial side. The second thing is that, yeah, those people are helping us to maintain and build the not just the tooling, the ecosystem itself. I would say mostly the ecosystem. We probably do 99% of the development within our own sphere, and then we try to contribute back to external tools. We mm, we employ maintainers of certain tools like Postgres and PostgreSQL. So people who are upstreaming code as well. So largely where the community come in is anytime there's feedback, say on Reddit or in our Discord, and people are stuck, a lot of people are jumping in and just helping out other people within the community. And we transparently just cannot keep up with the growth of Supabase. There's this year with, I think in the past 12 months, gone from 1 to 4.5 million developers just signing up to our platform. Not to say all those using the self-hosting, and we cannot scale our team fast enough to keep up with all the support that we need to do. Luckily, our community is stepping up. They're, using the tools, they're learning them, they're giving back their knowledge to the community as well. And so it's been a real benefit to everyone involved that it's been open source and that we've got this community around us.
So have you run into any conflicts within your community that you've had to manage? Open source communities can be a little obstreperous. And if you ran into any challenges, how did you go about dealing with them?
Yeah, largely the challenges were on those three things that I said. Is the license okay? Is it self-hostable enough? Is there a commercial entity? So we clearly can't solve the third. We still to this day have people coming in and telling us, they might be cynical even, and we can't. They say that maybe we're using tools that are open source, or even though we're developing them ourselves, or we're benefiting from open source, there's not enough that we could give back to the community. And that's a challenging one because you can be as, kind of try to give as much as you can, and you'll never kind of meet some standards. The one where it's been really fair is self-hosting. In the early days, for example, we didn't have the dashboard open sourced. It wasn't from anything that, we didn't want to open source it. It just, when you're getting started, you want to build very fast. And so a lot of the code that we're developing was bundled with the billing code. And we had to do quite an exercise to extract my sloppy code, to be quite fair, where we just extracted anything that might put our customers at risk, all the billing and infrastructure stuff from the dashboard. And then still to this day, sometimes not through any mistake, we might hire a new person and they develop something and then they don't realize, well, you can't push it out until it's open sourced first. So, there's always this tension between moving fast, pushing things that might not be open source and bundled inside the infrastructure repo versus trying to extract it so that it's like quite cleanly in the open source and can be self-hosted. So just this week, actually, we announced that we've hired a lead specifically just to look after self-hosting, and they'll work full time on this task.
Did you ever have any forks or any more extreme problems?
Yeah. We've got forks. We've got one that I think is very popular in China. It looked almost exactly like us, except for maybe a change in the logo. But that's all right. I mean, these things will happen, and if nothing else, I mean, they're just kind of promoting the fact that it's a good way to build software, and we're not really in these ecosystems. I think if we had something like an AWS come along and say, we want to do a self-hosted Supabase, then we probably would spend some brain cycles on that, but it's never happened. It's just not it hasn't been an issue. The way that I think about Supabase is that principle at the start, where a suite of tools, and the thing that we bring is a phenomenal developer experience and a lot of taste. And there's kind of a saying that we use in the boardroom: you can't fork taste. So you can't really put Supabase inside the AWS dashboard and then suddenly the developer experience is going to be as good. For anyone who's used the AWS dashboard, that it's difficult to use, and you're not going to have the same experience that we deliver to a developer. So it's a risk, but it's honestly less of a risk than I think people estimate that it will be.
I think it's interesting that you're focusing on user experience, at least as much as functionality, and I think that's a great thing, and it's maybe something that some people don't focus on enough.
hmm I think it's a challenge in open source, actually, historically as well. It's one of these funny things where, actually, it was a podcast I was listening to last night, and they were talking about what does the collective not do very well, and one of the things is design. Historically, open source tools are not very well designed, and the experience is not great because design by collective is turns out to be pretty tricky to pull off compared to, say, if you take something like Apple, where they've got a strong opinion and it's, very clear what their boundaries are. This is one thing where open source, I think, should recognize that, okay, it's better if there's just maybe a small set of people that can do design. So this is one where we've, had to put our foot in the, like a stake in the ground on a lot of the design choices. People will come in and they might contribute something, and it might be great, but it might not fit the overall design, the overall long-term vision of how everything clicks together in Supabase. And we have to say no, which is hard because they might have put a lot of effort into this. It's becoming less and less of an issue as we become clearer and we've got our guardrails around our design processes. But at the early stages, there's kind of this design by committee um, dynamic that you have to be a little bit more intentional about with your community.
I think that's a great point. And one thing that you mentioned kind of really just resonated with me, and I'd like to use that kind of as an opportunity to just you know give a philosophical plug for the concept of commercial open source. Is that I think part of the reason why commercial open source is really kind of starting to take off is because it marries kind of the benefits of the spirit of open source, as well as kind of the having the idea of a commercially driven entity that can kind of bring resources together and direct sort of design and things like that. So marrying those two philosophies and those two underlying benefits of each paradigm, to borrow a cringeworthy corporate term, um, I think can create a lot of really amazing things within the realm of commercial open source and sort of bring about the best of both worlds. Um, in open source, there's always a lot of pressure to add features, and when you kind of get feedback from your community, you get a lot of like, it'd be great if we had this, it would be great if you had that. How do you navigate that, and how do you decide where to focus your development efforts, and which kind of feedback you really kind of look very closely at versus things that you maybe, don't look too closely at or put on the back burner?
Yeah, this one's tricky because each feature there might not be a clear reason why to the community. So you need to be as transparent as possible with your community. And sometimes those things still are not good justifications. And in that case, you've done your job, you've tried to explain it. And yeah, sometimes you'll just upset a few people. A really good example in our community is um, building offline, because we're positioned as a open source Firebase alternative. One thing that Firebase have done very well is they have this offline support. And I won't get into the details of it, but it's a very tricky thing to do because there's lots of trade-offs. And even if you choose one way, you're going to kind of not solve a bunch of other ways of doing it that people might need. And so because of this, what we wanted to do, and is also very good for our community, is in many ways let 1,000 flowers bloom. So we would support people within the community doing several different ways of doing it, so that when people have their way of doing it, then they can choose one of the partners. This also helped us build out the ecosystem. It's still not clear to people that that's really the way that we wanted to do it, and still to this day, it's one of the most requested features. Will we do it in the future? We might do, but we still will have that problem where we're not solving it for a bunch of people. So we've done what we can, tried to be transparent about the reasons, tried to promote those within the ecosystem. And at that point, we've done as much as we can, and we can't necessarily yeah, there's nothing more we can change. We can't go about developing it and solve everyone's requests in one go anyway.
That's by the way, before I forget, we are taking questions from our listeners. If you do have a question, please share it in the chat. Um, um, and we'll do our best to get to it. I do see that there's one question there, and we'll try to get to it in a moment. But one thing that you mentioned, really kind of is really interesting, and that's going back to the question of ecosystem and how you've there have been, partners and companies that have emerged out of the Supabase ecosystem. And if I can kind of extrapolate from what you're saying, it's kind of they may play the role of building out features or building out add-ons or what have you that address some of those things where people are clamoring for features that, for various reasons you decide not to take up, but then a partner emerges, or, another company, a startup emerges that kind of takes that on. If you could kind of talk a little bit more about that and how, um, ways in which that has benefited Supabase, as well as kind of what are some of the more formal, concrete things that you're doing to cultivate that and encourage that?
Yeah, it's a critical piece of not just of any tool, basically. What you want is, you never want a developer to get stuck completely. If they're missing a feature, or they're blocked on something that they need, then they shouldn't be using your tool, basically. You want them to have all options available. We are very opinionated about being unopinionated about a lot of ways that people can use Supabase. And so as a result, we've tried to push that, people can get involved and build around the parts where there are many different opinions. So offline is a great one. This means that we kind of see ourselves as an ecosystem of ecosystems. We support existing tools, we support new companies coming in, we support developers, and kind of hopefully we're a little bit like a rising tide, raising a few different ships. And if we can do this, then, and people can say make money not directly from us, but by tapping into our ecosystem, that's just part of building a healthy ecosystem in general. It benefits us, it benefits them, and it benefits the developers. It's just such a good way of everyone getting benefit. I think a lot of people see it as they get nervous when they see people building around them, like, oh, we're not good enough to build some feature and someone else had to build it. I think that's a natural way to think, but it's an incorrect way to think. You should be really happy when you see people who are building things that allow developers or your users to use your tools in slightly different ways. A really good example, for example, is we have a nice dashboard, but actually there's a bunch of dashboards on top of Supabase that allow you to use it like a CMS instead of the way that we've got it. Ours is very geared up for developers, but actually there's a whole community of people that use Supabase who are not so developer focused. They only want to edit the content inside it. Now, we could try to cater to two of these different profiles, but it's a nice thing that actually they can go and click a button, get this tool from someone else and use it in that particular way.
And I really like what you mentioned about how you shouldn't, look at it as if somebody builds a feature that you haven't built, that should not be viewed in a negative light, and instead it should be viewed as, an opportunity and proof of your um, you know, proof of the strength of your own ideas. And the other thing, ecosystem of ecosystems. I like that. That's a great way of phrasing it. Um, as you mentioned, Supabase is scaling now, and there's a lot of obviously there's a lot of challenges that startups face when they scale, and a lot of those are good problems because if your user base is growing, if the demand is growing, then that's a good thing. What are some of the challenges you face that are unique to the open source and commercial open source context in scaling Supabase?
The unique things largely are the surface area that you have to be available on. In particular, the open source users can be very demanding. Um, and they might not always be so clear on what their demands are. They are just willing to vent their frustration. Maybe not with, say, a reproducible bug or something like that. So, in many ways, if you're not open source, you have one channel, which is your support tickets or maybe your social media as well, to help your customers. Whereas in open source, you've got very many channels, and in particular, code-related channels, where they might get stuck on various things that you need to get involved with. So I think it's just a surface area problem. This is a two-sided coin, though, because as I mentioned, your community can also step up and help out as long as you do a great job at involving them, and kind of empowering them to actually get involved in your open source. Don't try to keep it, just within your own company. Then you'll it's a yeah, it's um, another way of you've got more problems, but also you've got a larger support team if you do your job right.
One thing another founder we interviewed mentioned is that what gave them the most joy is that when a member of the community asked a question and another member of the community who was not associated with the company at all jumped in to answer it and basically solve the problem before it even became a problem for the company. So I that's echoes exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. I remember at the start, I used to get alerts for everything, and I would literally answer everything as fast as I could. And then they started piling up, and I just couldn't answer things fast enough. And I realized for the ones that I wasn't answering, the community would eventually see them and answer them. And I realized, oh, I'm actually limiting our community by answering everything so fast. And when I step back a little bit, then I realize, oh, there's this whole ecosystem of people who are willing to help out.
Mm.
Um, okay, so you've come a long way on your journey, and so over the course of your journey, have you formed any new ideas about what open source or commercial open source means to you or the world?
I think not a lot has changed in my view. We always were, and myself, my co-founder, and myself, very philosophically aligned to open source. And we knew that if we wanted to build a company, we wanted to do it in the open source ecosystem. I think I've come to appreciate some nuances of open source, maybe the things that I explained around how people view it and the different profiles of, well, I guess where they sit in the spectrum of open source purism. Um, and you kind of develop, I guess, a bit of a shell for a hard shell around some of those who are very purist. But otherwise, I still appreciate those people. Those ones are the ones who keep you honest as well and keep the open source ecosystem thriving and honest. So, um, yeah, largely, I'm still, yeah, very bullish on open source. Probably even more bullish on open source than when I started.
Great.
I think we'll try to before we wrap up, we'll try to get to some questions now. So one question, both Heather and myself, we've advised a lot of open source projects and companies, and they generally fall into two categories as far as commercial open source. One is that the founders, they always knew they wanted to start a company, and they're going the open source route as like a conscious strategy for building the company. The other bucket is the project started as sort of a labor of love, a passion project, and at some point they realized either they saw a commercial opportunity or they kind of realized that they need to go the commercial route in order to sustain the project. With respect to that use case in particular, or that scenario in particular, do you have any advice for what is that point at which, okay, I started this as just a labor of love, but I it may be time to convert to a commercial model or adopt a commercial model in order to sustain it, or hey, there's like an opportunity here where we can build something, we can build a business around this. What is that point, that and is there any advice that you can provide to people, when they're upon that point?
First of all, I think the former would be a poor reason to do it. If you're building a startup is a very long journey and it's very hard. So if you're doing it just because you want to sustain yourself, then um, it's the wrong reason. The right reason is because there is a commercial opportunity around it. If it will not be able to fund itself, then you'll end up burning out largely. You end up trying to monetize something, you'll end up working on it. The thing that you love will no longer become a labor of love. It'll just become a labor. And so, um, yeah, I can see why that should be a part of why you want to monetize. But the real decision here should be, is there a viable business opportunity in what I'm developing? If there isn't, probably just keep it a labor of love. Or if you can't sustain yourself on developing it, then you have to be very honest with yourself that this is just an open source tool. It's not a business itself. So I think thinking about this problem from, is this a business, is a bit different from, um, is this something that I want to keep open source? If you can check off that, yes, it's a commercial business point of view, then then proceed. I see a lot of people who go for 5 years and they're banging their head against the wall trying to make money, and then they get very disenchanted from the fact that they can't make money from open source. But actually the question that they should have asked was, can I make money from this idea at all, whether it's open source or not open source? And if they cannot solve that question, then it's really just it's not worth spending 5 years of your life doing.
Awesome. Thank you. A lot of great insight there on just startup practices in general, open source or non-open source. Um, what processes have you put in place to make it easy for your team to bundle your open source and proprietary editions and then deploy them to production?
Yeah, we have a lot. Supabase is actually an amalgamation of various tools. Each of those tools bundles up into a Docker image. The Docker images can be hosted with Docker Compose up. So it's literally a case of just cloning our repo and running this Docker Compose up. And then from there, we try to make this as automated as possible. We have client libraries for each and every tool. Basically, you can think of it, say, like 5 different tools. Each tool has a library, and that library can be in various different languages. And then when you bundle it all up, it's also got a bundled client library, and that bundles up. So I know, for example, the client libraries team are just now moving everything to a mono repo where everything can be developed in lockstep for each language. So yeah, it's just a continuous process of making things simpler and easier for the open source community.
Okay, great. Another question from our listeners, and this may require you to kind of take off your commercial hat and just put on your passionate developer hat. Do you have any recommendations on how, researchers and just maybe even enthusiasts who build exciting tools but don't necessarily want to be CEOs, maybe they're not even applying, agile development processes. Do you have any recommendations on how they can connect with organizations or resources to make sure that their tools stay secure and stable and they get those benefits of, having a commercial operation without needing to build one with respect to the quality of the tool?
Yeah, and I assume they mean maybe receiving some sort of finances to help maintain it, or
Not necessarily finances, but just general recommendations on how they can, because even, those types of tools, they become very critical infrastructure components in many ways, even if they're non-commercial. And so how do the maintainers of those tools, make sure that they're not putting something out there that, compromises security or stability?
yeah, whether you're commercial or not, you should always chat to your customers. Um, so, for example, if your tool is used by some entity, some commercial entity, ideally you find the person who's using it. Usually they're a developer, and you can just reach out to them. You can just talk to people, and that's a great thing because talking with your customers, interacting with them, maybe not even on a call, just ping people on wherever they live. That's always a good thing, and, so that's largely yeah, and if you don't have users, um, you can find those users by putting it on forums or putting it out in the world. Doing show hack and news, for example, was something that I used to do a lot, when I was just building for fun as well. So, and I still do that. If I build something for fun, I put it out and try to chat to users, and I put it out to the world, and just get a direct line to the people who actually need the thing that you're building and or want to use the thing that you're building. So as soon as you've got that, you know who you're building for. It's okay if you're just building for yourself. And in that case, you shouldn't have to worry about all those things like security and everything. You worry about what you care about. And then if eventually it becomes adopted by people and that's one of their concerns, you talk to them specifically about what they need in terms of security. It's a broad thing. Security, for example, can mean many different things in different contexts, how it is hosted, um, what it, yeah, basically like which environment it might run in, many of these things. So without talking to the customers, it's hard to know the nuance.
Well, I think the overarching theme that's been, echoed throughout our conversation is, be in touch with your community and, make sure that you communicate with your community and understand their what feedback they have to offer. Um, Lastly, I wanted to give you an opportunity to, tell us about what's next for Supabase. What are you most excited about? What are some of the things that you're building that you can talk about, and sort of what's on the horizon as of today, October 1st, 2025?
Well, on October 3rd, we'll be running our our first user conference, which you mentioned at the start. So that will be really exciting. It'll be live streamed as well. So I'm not sure when this comes out, but perhaps you can watch the replay if it comes out after. We're also developing a couple of exciting open source tools. One of them is OrionDB, which is a new storage layer for Postgres, and this solves some of the key problems with Postgres around bloat and wraparound. It's quite technical. And then another one that we announced not too long ago is one called Multigress, which is going to be developed, is currently being developed by the co-creator of Vitess, which is a sharding and scalability tool for the MySQL ecosystem. And there is no tool in the Postgres ecosystem that does this, no open source tool. So we'll be developing this with our community and with some commercial partners as well. And this will be 100% open source as well. So hopefully we'll get that initial version out this year, and then develop it throughout 2026 in the open source.
Paul, thank you very much. We really appreciate your time, and we really appreciate you sharing your wisdom and your insight and your experience. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. You will find the recording of this session shortly on our YouTube. And if you have any questions that we did not get to today, feel free to reach out to Heather or myself. And yeah, once again, thank you, and we hope to see you soon.
Thanks, Paul.